Welcome to another weekly featured business, brought to you by Visibility Impact and your host, James Moffat, where he will gracefully take our featured guest on a personal and business journey and stories that will inspire, educate, and engage you.
Hello and welcome to another Friday Featured Business brought to you by Visibility Impact and your host, myself, James Moffat. Today we have our 126th guest, Jaques Smit. Is it Smit?
That's correct, yeah, Smit.
All right, so Jaques, or you might pronounce it different, so please pronounce your name the correct way because I'm terrible with names.
No worries. Everyone struggles with it, and everywhere in the world I've gone, they said it different. Jaques is the way that my native people would say it. The French would be a bit more Jacques, which is probably the correct way of saying it.
And typically, I mean, how do people address you normally at home or colleagues or friends?
I've had everything from Jaques to Jaques to Jaques to you name it, I've had it. So I respond to all of them. I'm perfectly okay with that. But Jaques is fine if you can manage it.
Jaques. Okay. I shall try to remember that I am shocking with names.
That's totally fine. Don't worry about it. I realize that my name is complicated.
Yeah. And Smit, where does that originate from?
So I'm Namibian, South African. I was born in Namibia. So Smit used to be Schmidt, which got changed to Smit with a TD at the end when they went from Germany to Netherlands. And then from Netherlands to Cape Town, they dropped the D and just made it Smit. Right. And then from there on, that's how it sticked.
Yeah, because I lived in the Netherlands and I had lots of colleagues that had that name. And a lot of them actually came from South Africa or went to South Africa.
Yeah, that particular spelling is a South African spelling.
All right. Okay. So let me just take you on a journey. But first of all, for the audience, where are you living now? And you already alluded to where you're from. So if you could just elaborate that. Where are you living now? Where are you from? And what made you go to wherever you are?
Sure, no worries. Yeah, I live in Wellington, New Zealand at the moment. Beautiful windy Welly, as they call it, the coolest little capital. And that's because we do have a lot of wind. And we have a sign that looks like the Hollywood sign, but it looks like it's blowing away. So we're good at laughing at ourselves as well. I'm a Kiwi citizen as well, so I've been here for a while. I came here from Germany. And before Germany, I came to Germany from Singapore. Before Singapore, I lived in New Zealand again. And before that, I lived in South Africa. And before that, I lived in Namibia. So wow. I like traveling, let's put it that way. And I got to live in a lot of different places, which has been pretty amazing. But my family originally come from Namibia. We joke that we're a nomadic people because almost every generation has died in a different country to what they were born in. And I have certainly kept up my end of the family tradition.
Right. I mean, that's quite a change then. And you mentioned quite a number of different countries there. Was that for business later or was that through childhood?
No, so my parents did move from Namibia to South Africa before my dad's job when I was little. And so I grew up mostly in South Africa in Mpumalanga area, which is like the essentially the high veld or highlands, high up in the mountains. And then when I was a teenager, we moved to the capital city, Pretoria, where I did my high schooling. I always loved games, like from when I was quite young. And I tried my best to get into it immediately. But initially, I didn't think that was possible because there was no industry at all in South Africa. So I went and studied graphic design. And after graphic design, I tried my hand at advertising and it was mediocre for me. So I tried game development with a bunch of friends. We managed to do pretty much struggle our butts off until we finally got ourselves into a situation where other people were willing to hire us. And then I got hired by a company in New Zealand. And from there, it was easy. Then it was just like, companies were headhunting me to come to them. And so I got to go wherever I wanted. And when I married, we went from New Zealand to Singapore. My wife and I married in South Africa, but I was living in New Zealand. She was living in South Africa whilst we were engaged, because I moved just as we got engaged. So I couldn't bring her along with me. And then we moved back to South Africa, got married, and then moved immediately to Singapore as like our honeymoon / first job, where I then proceeded to basically work 16-hour days, 5 days a week. So she barely saw me. And then I went to Germany, where the work-life balance is a lot more feasible. So yeah, that was pretty much what happened. It was just kind of like going from place to place for my job as a game developer, specifically game design and product owner. And then I ended up in New Zealand, where I started getting into kind of the more, like we were talking about it a bit earlier, but it's that kind of reconnecting with your core. I always loved game development, but from like, so I'm not natively English. I speak Afrikaans as my first language. So when I was about 7, I couldn't actually speak English. And my dad had this box of floppy drives that had games on it that he had no idea that I broke into, and I basically plucked them out and played games while he was at work. And then I would neatly put them back so he didn't know they were ever disturbed. But one of the games that was in there was Space Quest. And at the time, it was, you had to type everything that you wanted to do, and it was in English. So I was highly motivated to learn English by like literally sitting there with an English Afrikaans dictionary. 7 years old, I could barely speak or spell the one language, and I was trying to figure out the other one and trying to kind of like figure out how do I translate what I want to do into English and then type it into the computer to get the computer to do it. And that really inspired me, because I was learning as I was playing. And I thought, this is such a beautiful idea. I would love to one day make games that inspire people to be better human beings and teaches them something valuable at the same time. And so that's where my kind of like love of game development and my desire to help people kind of really connected to each other. And then, life happens and you're like, this is just a dream. But I always held on to it. If someone asked me, what were you going to do? I was like, I'm going to make games. And they're going to be like, I don't know how I'm going to do it yet. I'll do whatever I need to in order to figure it out, but I'll get there. And then like, I'd say probably in my university days, I started thinking like, am I really going to be able to pull this off? Like, there's really no way of getting there. I can't see how it'll work. But I got there. It just took never giving up, essentially.
Right. Let's just hold that there at the moment. So before we get there, let's just go back a bit. I mean, you said, so when you were 7, you had that curiosity to want to do gaming and obviously learn English because the games were in English. So, and did that sow the seeds of, the learning part? You talked about the learning part. Also, how can gaming be an educational thing rather than just a game? So you were thinking that at the same time, or that came later? So
no, I was thinking that at the same time. I was 7 years old, and I was thinking, how could we use this to kind of teach people? My family was quite religious at the time. I'm not really religious anymore, but the ethical values that came with it was the thing that really stuck with me. And for me, it was like, how do we use games to teach these kind of like deep ethical values to people? That like, it's a kind of a weird thing for a 7-year-old to be pondering, but that's essentially what was stuck in my head, probably because my parents were quite religious at the time.
Right. I'm holding you on that because I'm thinking, I have 3 children. I'm going to ask you how many you have in a minute, but you also mentioned that you had a challenge also with your own personal development, which we're going to touch on. But my son, my eldest son, who's 10, has exactly the same. Well, I don't know about exactly the same, but same acronyms anyway. And yeah, he has a challenge, but he's also into gaming. Now, we don't want him to keep playing these games because a lot of the games, they're actually detrimental. We like the idea that he's gaming in the way that that he's learning new skills and things, but it becomes addictive, and it becomes addictive in the wrong way, that these games can have a detrimental effect rather than a positive effect. So it gets from a positive to a negative. And so what you're saying, I'm going to bring up a bit later, but let's just go back to that. So as a kid growing up, you mentioned you had siblings.
Yeah. So we were four brothers. I was the oldest. My two younger brothers were twins. And then I had a brother that was way, way younger than me. So, competitiveness was high and blood flowed often.
I can imagine. I mean, four boys.
Yes.
I mean, also there's another similarity there, or connection. I mean, I have my eldest son who's 10, and then we have twins. I mean, a boy and a girl, and they're 7-year-old. Right.
My condolences.
Yeah. So let me just ask about, I mean, your kids. So how many kids do you have?
I just have the one, Liam. Right. He's turning 7 in a couple of weeks.
All right. So similar age to my twins. Right. So just going back. So growing up as a kid, I mean, besides gaming, I mean, were your brothers into gaming as well? And they would sneak the games out as well and put them back?
Oh yeah, for sure. They definitely followed my example.
So
we were pretty deep into it, but like my dad was quite into computers too, so he liked it as well and enjoyed it. That's why he had a collection that we could steal.
But what games were they, and what kind of device did you use at the time?
Well, we were pretty limited. I mean, I'm talking like the late 1980s here. So you're talking like black and yellow screen on a tiny little XT computer, barely be able to run like a cell phone these days. And the games my dad liked was kind of like the ones that we ended up playing. So text-based adventure games back in those days were quite popular. So you'd have like a character running around on screen, and you'd have to type in kind of like open door, look around. And then you have to read the boxes to figure out what to do. He also enjoyed the kind of like flight simulator type games. So we often flew around in the jet fighters and so on. They were really great. So PC games were kind of like my stable going up. Like we didn't even have an option of video games. Like that was not even a thing that we could have. It wasn't until the 90s like that I even had a friend that had video games that I could go and see. So I grew up with the standard kind of like the graphics generation, where every year you had your graphics card upgraded because the graphics were so drastically improving over time. Strategy games were my love. When I was 12, I sat down with my dad's history books and Age of Empires, and I built out the whole like campaign of like I said, grew up in a very religious household. So I actually built out the whole like Jewish like Exodus journey back to Canaan, and like made missions for everything that happened, and kind of tried to like write down the stories in the history books and like, capture it all in the quests. It was, very primitive, but I was 7 years old or 12 years old, but it was fun.
I think it's amazing. And I'm just looking at my kids, because we have a bit of a challenge at the moment with my eldest son gaming, and we restrict it, but then he goes around to his friends and then he starts doing it again there. So can never get him away from it. But if it can be incorporated into kind of a learning, so I'd rather the addiction was a learning and doing something that's fun, still fun with his friends. We don't want to like ban him from doing it, but we want him to like, there's got to be a balance. And there's got to be, and maybe there could be other games that you could introduce that are a learning that would be fun as well. And I mean, from what you're saying, I mean, building out all sorts of different things and making it educational as well. So, because as soon as parents think, oh, gaming, I mean, it is kind of a red flag. And you want to say, no way. And if you keep saying no to a kid, they're going to defy you and go and do it anyway. So it's better to kind of work with them and work out what is kind of acceptable, what is the time limit on this, and what is it they're actually gaming?
Yeah, all valid questions, and balance is important in all things, right? Like, too much of anything is bad for you, full stop. Like, too much water can kill you. So, there's no such thing as something that is good in excess. Everything must be in balance. And games are no different. And yeah, there are games that are for different purposes. Games are not a thing that's unique to this generation. Games have been around for millennia, right? Like, the first games with Mancala will come from ancient Egypt. The idea of games, play as a way to learn, is actually more inherent in like how human beings are evolved to learn things, rather than structured learning with books and like teachers and stuff. And not that I want to, say that those things are bad at all. Like, those things serve a purpose in their own right. But I think often there's a notion that games are not good for you. And that is true if you take things to the extreme, or if you take the wrong kind of thing to the extreme. So sure, if you play an idle RPG, which you don't have to think at for 8 hours a day, you're probably not doing any like positive things for your brain or for your motor skills or any kind of development. But sitting in front of Netflix for 8 hours a day isn't any better, right? Like, there's proven things that have shown that extensive TV watching is really bad for family units and collaboration and communication and learning. So when you look at games, let's say, for instance, the Total War franchise, a very popular franchise that's done by Creative Assembly, who's a subsidiary of Sega. They take like extreme care to be historically accurate in all of the representations that they do of their historic games. So if you play like Rome Total War, you're learning everything about the Roman Empire, all the different tribes that were around them, the kind of like political systems, the names of the emperors, all these kind of like interesting things about history that I always laugh, because it's like when yoga became a really big thing around school, and the girls started doing it, and like my mom started doing it, me and my friends already knew what yoga was for years, because we've been playing Street Fighter 2, and like one of the characters did yoga. When my dad told me like very excitedly about Alexander the Great and how amazing he was, I was like, yeah, that's the guy from Age of Empires. He conquered, Persia, but with the Greeks, right? It's like, what? Do you know that? But the point is, like, games have a lot of people in them that really take care to live up to the subject matter, the same as like a good author or a good movie creator would. If you look at the Assassin's Creed franchise, you can go run around the Peloponnesian Greek islands and go see all of the cities in their splendor, and go speak to Socrates and visit the two Spartan kings and see the plays like in Athens play out the way that it would have been back then, because they've taken so much care to reconstruct those things in a way that you can experience the history, the philosophy, and the beauty of the arts. So the question and this is kind of like, I don't feel good about saying this to anybody in terms of their parenting. Every person must parent the way that they see is right. I believe in balance. My kid plays games. I play games with him very often. Thinking about what kind of games is good at what age is also a different factor. Trying to push a kid to play a game that's far too advanced for their age won't do anything good, right? Because they might not be ready for the complexity inherent in something like Total War at 7. That's not going to work. Playing Civilizations is great, but doing it with a 7-year-old is not going to be fun for them. But that doesn't mean that that you have to push them there. The question is, what are the skills you're trying to help them develop? And how do you limit that? So my kids' limits are, if you play an hour of Roblox or watch an hour of YouTube, I will do one of those two. And they count as combined time. So you can have an hour of both. And usually what he does is he puts a half-hour timer on, and then he does one and the other. Then you must first do an hour of something that's completely different, like go draw or play music or read something. And I mean, I was certainly not as clever as he is at 7 years old. Like, I won't say it's gaming's fault. Definitely not. I think it's because he's really diligent and he does a lot of great stuff. But I mean, he reads way more than I read when I was 12. Like, he goes through books as if he just devours them. Like he loves it. His math he woke up the other night in the middle of the night. Well, I wasn't quite asleep yet. And he shouted out to me, "Dad, what's 5 times 3? I was like, why? What do you mean? Why do you want to know? No, I just figured it out. I just want to see if you know. It's like, well, do you tell me what you think first? Oh, it's 15. It's like, okay, yeah, good boy. Like, well done. That's like, he's thinking about stuff like that, which I didn't do at his age. And it's not because of games, but it wasn't that games made it any worse either or detracted from it. As long as there's balance, then it's fine. If I try to keep him away from it, his friends all do it. Like, he's going to start doing it behind my back, and I won't have the influence to be able to say, hey, you know what? This game actually isn't worth your attention. What about if we rather play this game? Like, Minecraft is an amazing game. You can even get like a science pack in Minecraft where all of the elements are real elements in the periodic table, and you can combine them in order to be able to create like science experiments. And there's really cool things like in Minecraft where you can combine redstone in order to be able to create contraptions. You can even build like basic computers in Minecraft just using the blocks and stuff that are there. So the question is, what kind of skill would you like them to develop? Find a game that matches that and then engage with it alongside them so that they can see the fun in it. And when they see the fun in it, they're going to draw their friends into it too. And then it's like a beast on its own. Then it'll continue without you. But if you do just leave them, they're going to spend their time on idle games or, things that are fine to play a little bit, probably just waste your cognitive energy. And sometimes you need that, but kids probably don't need that unchecked.
No, I hear you. And I mean, this is a subject we could talk about all day. And also, we try to have a combination. I mean, exactly what you're saying. There has to be a time limit on things. So my eldest son plays the piano as well, but he seems that he would rather game than play the piano. Now, we don't want to restrict him from gaming, but we want him to play more piano. So we should adopt a system in the way that, right, if you have that hour or whatever time that we give him for gaming, with a combination, like, because he does YouTube as well, right? It can't be 2 hours, an hour of this, an hour of that, but then he's got to spend some time doing something else. Now, whether it's playing the piano, because his teacher keeps saying to him, all I need is 10 minutes a day. Mm-hmm. But he can't find that 10 minutes a day for the piano, but he can easily find, all day long gaming. Mm-hmm. So you're right, everything in a balance. So, but also board games. I mean, as kids growing up, I mean, I used to play a lot of board games, and they were great fun. And we tried to incorporate family games. I mean, it used to be Monopoly, and I used to love Monopoly, but it's actually one of the games I really dislike, because I think the essence of it is about building up as much property and wealth as possible. And trying to win over the others in the way that you've got the biggest property, the hotels, and you're going to find them if they land on yours. And I'm thinking now, when I think about it, I think that is definitely not the game I want for kids. I'm going to throw it away, right? But I think you start realizing that later. But I think, without dwelling too much about gaming at the moment, that there is a balance, and that there is also, if you think about education at schools, sometimes the classroom environment and the ambience and everything else, which I can introduce you to teachers and educators that have been on the show as well. They said it's old-fashioned, it's old school, it's wooden chairs, it's wooden desks, and maybe even the old desks that have the inkwell there still. Nothing has changed, and not in all schools, but in the majority of them. And the educational system hasn't changed. We haven't really learned that. I mean, how could you deliver a program using like some computer or something? Maybe they do in some cases, but make it fun in it's a game. Like you talk about learning history and you're learning about the Roman Empire or whatever. How could you learn something whilst combining kind of online, although in a school environment, with actually real, like hands-on stuff as well? Because I was bored at school. I was the biggest daydreamer ever, because it's either the delivery mechanism of the subject. I might have loved the subject, but the way it was delivered, either the teacher was boring or the way it was delivered was so boring. I had more fun looking out the window, right? Even watching paint dry would have been more fun. But then I've had the opposite. I've had a great teacher that was really exciting and engaging. And you could see that, yeah, it was the most boring subject, but it made it exciting because of the teacher. So, but combining other things and bringing other things in and leveraging on technology, could we do that in a sensible way with a balance, like as you said? That would be fun, entertaining, but very educational at the same time. So anyway, I mean,
and there are actually a couple, like, and because you're kind of on the subject, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention them. CodeSpark, amazing game. So basically what it is, it's like a platform for kids to create games and stories and to share their stories and see other people's stories. And it's like a very simple like environment, but like my kid loves to make games in there, and he's made tons of games, and he even like got inspired to write the story. So he wrote it down in text and then he built it in the game, and it has little animations, and it's like, you know, it's the tools are very simple. It's really like well designed for kids. And then it's got little games that teaches them how to code, where it's like teaches them how loops work, teaches them how to basically use loops in order to solve complex problems, but it builds it up slowly. Then you've got Reading Eggs, which is essentially a game that makes learning to read fun. And at least my son's school, New Zealand's schooling system, I have to say, it's really, really awesome. The way that they do schooling is great. But one of the things is they sponsor all the kids for Reading Eggs. So they all have an account with Reading Eggs where they can play these little games where they do phonetics, and they have to identify different like words and colors and objects. And they compete at school. Like Liam, my son, and his best friend Eva, they were literally competing to see who could get the furthest in the game in their math and in their reading. So there are companies that are doing wonderful things with this stuff. I think we can definitely talk about them a lot more and get them like out there, because they've done it well. They've made it fun and they made it engaging, and they've still retained like the basic core ideas of what the kids need in order to be able to develop their minds. But CodeSpark is like one of the best. Definitely recommend that one.
Okay. So we'll move on now, but with these games that you've mentioned, if you could share the links to them as well, because it'd be good to check them out. And I know, like at my kids' school, they do recommend games. I need to check out which ones they are in comparison and see. So, but you talk about you're a gamer in the way that you design games as well. So, so that was kind of what you did. I mean, from that. So just quickly, I mean, as a kid growing up, you weren't just gaming. I mean, you enjoyed the outdoors as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I come from a farming culture, so spent like, you know, holidays working on the farm and my uncle's farm in the Karoo. You know, did lots of like outside playing, climbing in the trees, and especially in small town that I grew up in. So yeah, absolutely. And often went back to Namibia, which is, if you haven't been there, it's one of the most amazing places in the world. The sky is beautifully lit, like with just tons of stars that you can see from there. There's the beautiful oases that you can visit, and you can go from the bush to the desert pretty easily. especially if you want to go like sandboarding or dune driving, things like that. It's like a huge playpen for adventure sports. And on top of that, the people are really nice. It's the kind of place where, because the towns are really far apart, you'd usually be stopping for a picnic on the way. And as the cars drive by, they'd hoot and like wave at you. And like, if you walk into a place like a small town, they'd greet you and want to know who you are and, you know, find out more about you. It's just a very like kind of down to earth place and a very beautiful place to visit.
So you still have family there?
Yeah. My aunt is actually one of the judges in the capital city at 𝗙𝗘𝗔𝗧𝗨𝗥𝗘𝗗, and my extended family still live out there as well.
Right. So, but you go back there a lot then, or not so much these days?
Oof, after COVID, the price of flights has gone, it's skyrocketing. Like, so I haven't been over in a little while. It's tough not to be able to go visit family and stuff. You know, that's not ideal, but yeah, certainly would love to, but I haven't been back in like 6 or 7 years.
Right. So that is kind of fast forward a few things. So, I mean, growing up as a kid, I mean, you mentioned here in the questionnaire that I sent out that you had some challenges. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you want to, when was that kind of diagnosed?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I now know that it is ADHD, but when I was like 7, 8 to 10, they tried to figure out what it was because they couldn't really quite figure it out. At first, they thought it was dyslexia. Mm-hmm. ADHD wasn't very well known at the time, so they kind of like misdiagnosed it. They thought maybe it's ADHD, but he doesn't seem to be hyperactive. So there must be something wrong there. Only later did they kind of like make the links that not always does it actually have hyperactivity as one of the symptoms. It's like there's a variety of different ways that it can manifest. And so growing up, they kind of diagnosed me with you have dyslexia, but I didn't have dyslexia. And then later on, it became clear that it was actually ADHD. But what that meant was that I had this like very unfortunate habit of answering questions in exams, and then the teacher would be sitting down with me and like, Jaques, can you just tell me, like, you put this answer here. What did you mean to say? And it's like, okay, well, this is the question. This is the answer. She's like, well, I can see that you gave the right answer, but this isn't the right question for that answer. So you have the information, but you can't seem to put it on the page in the right place. And so like that was kind of like a challenge I worked through most of my schooling career, really struggling at school and like trying to figure it out. And what's very interesting for me is because I'm kind of like, I'm addicted to learning. That's what I do. I learn all the time. I do everything I can get my hands on. I read all the time. I'm listening to audiobooks or doing courses. And often like my friends go like, dude, it's so easy for you to learn all this stuff. Like, you know, just shut up. Stop making it feel bad. It's like, you know what? It's not easy for me. And it wasn't easy for me. Like you're seeing years and years of heartache and difficulty culminating in me finally feeling able to learn because I have so many different platforms that are now catered for a way that I can learn, that I've learned how to use what's all available to me now to learn, because my attention deficit disorder in my past made it really hard for me to be able to learn the more traditional approaches. Like sitting down and reading a nonfiction book is like basically asking me to pull my own eyeballs out. It is so tough. But put that on an audiobook and I'll devour it. And I'll like kind of use every single sentence in that book and like apply it immediately afterwards. And that was the really interesting thing about like, you know, what I discovered in my brain is I dealt a lot better with audio than I did with text. And then I got really into writing and fiction. And now I read really well because I've just practiced so much. Yeah, but I still don't do nonfiction reading. I do audiobooks. but
Yeah.
I read a lot of fiction books.
Yeah, I want to come on to that in a minute. So, yeah, I talk about, I was interested in the ADHD because my elder son also has been diagnosed with a form of that. And I mean, he can be a genius at some things, as we mentioned earlier. I mean, like his piano, he does piano lessons and he's absolutely gifted. I mean, he can play with two hands. He's not even looking. He can memorize, but he can also read the music, but he can memorize it. And he can play with two hands. He can cross his hands over. He can be looking around the room, right? And it's just magical. And if he could spend a bit more time focused on that, I mean, he's already, to me, gifted at that. But yeah, it'd be excellent. But whatever he picks up, he's good at. I mean, he's good at mathematics at school. But I think that the two go together. He's very logical and pragmatic thinker, and he challenges everything. Right? He wants to know the logic behind it. Why is it like that? Which probably comes from me because I always questioned everything at school until the teacher had to tell me to stop asking questions because they didn't have the answers. Right. But I wanted to know. I was just curious. Right. And I think that curiosity has stayed with me forever because if people can't give me the answer, I think, well, I have to find it out myself now. Or I would challenge the answer. And he's picked up that trait from me because he does the same. And then to a point that the teacher asks him not to ask the questions because the teacher doesn't have the answer. No, anyway, so just moving on. So then schooling, that's where did you go next? So, I mean, with the gaming, I mean, when you went on to further education, I mean, did you go to university and everything? What did you study there? And how did you then think that gaming was kind of what you wanted to focus on?
Well, I always held on to this idea that I wanted to make games. And I still wanted to do it with the intention at the time, like obviously that a lot of things were happening in my environment. Like I was really concerned with being able to get a job at all. Basically, it was a serious concern for me. Like, do I need to leave the country to get a job or can I get one here? And what happens to all my friends? Will they get jobs? And so I really wanted to find a way to be able to kind of like help people around me whilst I was figuring stuff out. It was always kind of like my thing. I want to create opportunities where I go. And obviously I didn't have the skills or the knowledge yet, but I had a compelling way about me in some ways. So initially I studied graphic design, and that went well, but like your son experiences, my attention is when hyper-focused, when I hit my hyper-focused state, nothing can break me away from it. And I get good at things really fast. But then what I at the time, especially during my 20s, hadn't quite mastered is how to maintain focus on something, because it was quick for something else to snag my attention and then I would hyper-focus on that. What I later found out is that the best thing for me to do is to take one subject at a time, move it forward until I get out of my hyper-focus state, then move on to the next thing, and then kind of try to loop it back by reigniting my interest in what I lost interest in, so I can keep kind of like rotating on a few things to get better at it. But at the time, I didn't have that. So I got good at graphic design, and then I kind of quit out of it. And mainly because I had kind of like caught up in getting a job in it, and working felt like a priority over studying. So I dropped out. But I continued to enrich myself. I started learning some code, some basics. And then friends of mine and I got together and we said, okay, you know what? We want to make games work. We want to figure out how to make games. And me and my two of my brothers and three of my other friends, we essentially just combined skills, jumped in, we started trying to make games. We were woefully under-equipped making games. Games making is no joke. And especially back then, like, You didn't have Unity and the Unreal Engine the way that they are now, where basically if you have a good internet connection and a good brain for puzzling stuff out, you could figure out how to make games just through tutorials online. Back then, it was quite a bit more complex than that. And whilst I knew how to do 3D for my studies, and my brothers were graphic designers as well, and we had a friend that was a programmer, we just kind of like, we were still very junior, very like kind of low skill, trying to figure out how to do it. So we struggled and we struggled and we struggled. Eventually, we managed to get something released that wasn't very good. It didn't do very well, but it kind of like sparked a few things off. So it kind of like was a catalyst for us to really own our crafts. And I started getting into writing at that stage, and I managed to write a story for a game that was published through Luma Arcade to Microsoft, which was The Harvest. And that gave me a lot of exposure to essentially like how the real thing works, how to kind of work things at a bit of a bigger scale. And that propelled me into the game space, because now I had more credibility, which allowed me to get my first kind of role as a lead game designer on a game for Gameloft in Auckland. And from there, it sort of took on a life of its own, because I've always been very driven. Like, I'd say it's one of the things that, like, even when I was going for assessments and psychology assessments, because often people with ADHD, what ends up happening is because they get beat down so many times, they start getting a little bit pessimistic about, things. They start kind of like lowering their bar for what they can achieve. Especially anxiety issues start to shape. Now, I'm not saying I'm free of anxiety issues. I certainly had them. There's a good reason why I became a coach in later years. But what I was extremely driven, and I did not give up no matter what. I pushed through every wall that I faced. And so I quickly got promoted. I quickly got like new opportunities for better jobs. And I got pulled from game design into product ownership, which was about making games successfully. And being kind of like an entrepreneur in my younger days and, knowing how to fail fast, I kind of like took to it very quickly. Also developed a very scientific approach, really thinking about like, critical thinking, bringing, understanding fallacies, understanding confirmation biases, and all these things to do better testing and experimentation around the games to be able to discover what makes the games work. And eventually I ended up in New Zealand as a product owner / game designer. And what then happened was that kind of like need to help people kept coming back to me. Like I kept wanting to find ways to support and help. And all the way up to in my career, I had like found opportunities to find those people that originally started with me, find them ways to get into jobs like in the industry, or, I had people kind of come live with me at one stage to work through things so that they could like figure out how to restart their lives. And so that the need was always there. And when I became kind of like more in the management tier of the game studio, what happened for me was I started realizing that the way we were doing things just it wasn't really, I don't want to say inhumane, but it kind of is. Like the old games industry was very inhumane. Like there's stories of death marches. I was talking earlier about the kinds of hours I was working. That was normal in the industry. It was completely normal to be doing months on end of like, 10 to 12 hour days and working weekends. And it's a passion industry. It's very easy for people to kind of like get caught up on that passion and almost exploit that passion. And I certainly, fell into that as well. I don't look back at my extreme overtime and say, well, that was a horrible time. I go look back at that and think, wow, that was a lot of fun with my friends. Like we were making something we were really proud of. But that inevitably led to burnout. I quit my jobs after a year for the first two because I was so burnt out. After a year, I could not even think straight. I was completely done. And then that's what kind of became norm in the industry, is people just churned. They just went from one company to another, and some of them left the industry and some of them stayed in the industry. There was, you had a bit of a tough guy attitude. Like, you don't know what you're doing. Like, you're a junior, like you've not been through the trenches, and like you've done the late nights, and almost became like a badge of honor. And I was like, this is not sustainable. This is not okay. We shouldn't be working like this. And the company I worked for in New Zealand certainly wasn't as extreme as some of the earlier ones I worked at, but they still had their occasional moments where things got off the rails and, things got a little bit intense. And the managers, the other managers, the senior executives, they were very supportive of wanting to find better ways. So that's what we did. We started setting off on this journey. How do we make games in a more sustainable way, in a better way? And that's when I got into Agile coaching. And as I became an Agile coach, I was leading an Agile transition with no experience of leading Agile transitions. I was just the most opinionated, strong-willed person, willing to put his fingers in the door whilst people slammed it. I got to a point where I was literally struggling with panic attacks because of just the amount of strain and the stress on me, of just how intense it was to lead this change effort. And the thing with getting more stressed is you start making worse and worse decisions, and you get yourself more and more in trouble. And eventually I came to a point where I was dealing with some issues with someone who wasn't quite able to click with their team. And I had a conversation with them, and afterwards they told me, like, listen, man, you need some coaching training. Like, the way you're dealing with this is not okay. You need some coaching training. And I was like, okay, what's coaching training? And so he sent me a link, and I looked at it, and I was like, okay, you've got a point. And so I kind of studied that, and I got really into it. There's a free course on Scrum Alliance, which I first did, which is just the core competencies of the ICF, the International Coaching Federation. Got into that. And I was like, okay, you know what? This is actually, I can see why this is a better way of doing things. And I started applying it. And then I realized that my stress levels were coming down. I was getting better effect. And then I was like, okay, I want to take this really seriously. So I went to Coach Masters Academy, which is a, pretty well-recognized, credible school teaching transformative coaching. And my initial thing when I signed up for it, it was an intense course. It's 3 months of pretty much every night training. And I was like, I don't really want to become a coach. I just want to become a better leader. I want to know more about how do I work with people? How do I listen better? How do I support people better? By the end of it, the number of times I'd seen people's lives change in a conversation, I'd been bitten with the bug. I wanted to be better at this. And so I immediately went on to advanced levels, and I spent another 4 months, becoming an advanced. And then I spent the next year doing my mastery level as well. So I basically I really pushed through all the way. Then I started becoming a better facilitator, did training around facilitation, became an advanced Scrum Master, did my Enterprise Executive, my Enterprise Agile training, all these kinds of different tools, because I started realizing that what makes me tick, my vision, what I exist for, is to create a world where people feel valuable, purposeful, and empowered. And these tools, these ways of looking at the world, was exactly what allowed me to accomplish that. And now it was a huge amount of work for me to make a change in the way I was doing things. My management style had to change, my leadership style, my communication style had to change. But it was just such a fantastic life-changing journey, because I started seeing how to use this hyper focus that in the past would hyper focus on getting a job done and just pushing through whatever wall. I started putting that into more constructive behaviors like coaching. And I was able to create a lot of amazing change for them. But then I found a different issue. I got so hyper focused on coaching is an amazing thing, but you're essentially constantly pouring your emotional energy out to support someone else. And I was running out of the emotional energy to be able to continue to do that, especially because I was, trying to go for my MCC, which means I was racking up the hours like crazy. So I found that I had disconnected with the creativity that I loved so much in the past. And I was starting to exist only for other people to talk to. And I needed something to balance it out. I needed to kind of refill the cup. And so that's when, this is kind of preempting your question there a little bit, but that's when Paulin reached out to me and he was like, hey, I work with people like you sometimes. They seem to really be good at the whole book writing thing. Have you thought about this? And I was like, you know what? I have. I'd like to send you some work. And then we got talking and I sent him my stuff and basically started talking about, he was first like, you could write about leadership. You're like, pretty prominent in the leadership environment. And MindForge is one of the things that I started, which is like, executive leadership coaching and transformation, which I have partners that work with me on that.
Okay. Can I just hold you there a minute?
Yeah, go for it. Sorry, I'm kind of running away with it now. Eh?
No. It's wonderful. There's a lot to absorb there as well. But I mean, so maybe just to fill in some of the gaps there. So you were doing Agile coaching and stuff. Was this while you were employed by a company? So you were doing it within a company?
Yes, both with a company. And so initially I was only working for the company and I was expanding my skill set, leading that Agile transition, which is like, Agile transitions never end, but it's definitely been through the hump and it's like, settled.
Yeah, so that was to help the company. Sorry to interrupt. That was to help the company that you actually worked for.
Yes.
Right. And then you took it to the next level with the Scrum and other things because you're getting the feedback that kind of maybe you were too direct with it and you wanted to be more personal with it.
Yeah.
And,
I needed to create a pool.
Yeah. So was there a point then that you decide, because you have your own business now, and so you're not employed by a company. This is your own business now. So at what point were you in the company and having all of this training, which would have been great, although a lot to absorb, and when you decided that, because I want to come on to the book thing a little bit later, and how did Paulin how did he reach out to you? Because just moving this on, we both have that common connection. We're both in the same book group, and he is our publisher, an editor and everything else. But I reached out to him. I found him. So I'm just curious on how he found you. But come on to that. That's kind of the second part of the question. The first part is, at what point did you decide that I want to kind of go it alone? And with all this knowledge and this training and everything I've got, I want to do my own thing.
I'll tell you when I get there. I don't like doing things alone. But the short answer is I actually still do work for that company as an Agile coach, as one of their senior Agile coaches and overseeing stuff. But I also have my own company doing executive coaching and doing change efforts for other companies. And I'm partnering with, I have two partners who work in that business. One of them is exclusively just in that business, looking after it. So what I did was I got permission from the company to be able to start my own business on the side, as long as I don't compete with them. So I'm not allowed to make games that compete with them. That's fine. I had no intention of doing that. I don't think I could handle making games on the side of making games. I tried that once. It's a bit much.
So this gaming company, how long have you been there?
Coming up on 10 years.
Right. Okay. And right. So you work there as well as do your own thing. Is it a well-known gaming company? Can you share, or is it better?
Of course. Yeah, I can talk about them. PikPok is they're pretty well known in terms of their mobile games. They used to be Sheep, which is a console game developer before they became PikPok. Their most well-known game is probably Into the Dead, which is a zombie shooter game, and they also have a horse game called Rival Stars Horse Racing, which isn't much about the horse racing anymore. It's actually more about the horse having now. But those are kind of like their prominent games. We've done tons of work, with Adult Swim, with DreamWorks over the years, a lot of our own IP. I've made games as game designer there, worked as product owner, worked as agile coach. This year I've worked on 4 different titles.
Wow.
Kind of just supporting different titles and helping them out and helping teams. And I mean, my passion is the same everywhere. And the reason I'm still with them is mainly because I really love the culture. I love the way that the company works and how they think and how much they care about their people. And I want to keep helping them. I want to see them fully through their own agile transition before I say goodbye and, kind of do.
So were they the reason why you moved to New Zealand in the first place?
They were.
Right.
The games industry is kind of like that. If you change job, you change country. But I specifically looked them up in Germany when I was like, you know what, Germany is cool, but it's a bit tough, especially if you don't speak German. And I was like, you know what, I heard amazing things about the company, PikPok. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine that was working me at the time. And he was like, yeah, they make cool games, man. You should apply. And so I did. And they liked my profile and they were like, okay, hey, come over. And I was yeah, sweet.
Excellent. So just digressing a little bit. So you mentioned that you met your wife and you had this long distance relationship before you got married, and she's seen you go through this kind of gaming and kind of the burnout and everything else, and what you're doing, the hours that you spent. So, I mean, how has she been with this kind of adaptation and everything? And I mean, does she do her own business, or maybe just share a little bit about her?
Yeah, totally. Laura is amazing. I think I would be a miserable wreck still trying to figure out how to have a life in South Africa somewhere if I hadn't married her. She's definitely the reason that I was able to pull myself together in a good way and didn't end up destroying myself in the process. So, I don't mind talking about her at all. And she still is the most supportive person in my life. She helps me edit the book. She helps me with business stuff. She helps me run a company while I have a full-time job, all these kinds of things. So she and I met when I was in South Africa still. We were together for a few months, like 7 months or 8 months, when we actually got engaged. When I got the job in New Zealand, I found out that I couldn't take her with me. She came to visit me for like a couple of months whilst I was there as well. She's a illustrator, so she's got an art background. Very, very good illustrator. Recently, she's decided maybe a year ago to kind of like refocus more on helping me with my stuff and doing business administration stuff for me and running my social media accounts and so on. And I'm very grateful for that. But she does still engage in her art, and it's been a very supportive.
I think I need her on the show.
I think so. She's a very inspiring person.
And when you said she does illustrations, kind of what type of illustrations?
Well, I mean, she's pretty skilled in terms of a lot of stuff, but her stuff that people will probably find the most impressive is like she can render like paint. She used to paint with oil painting. She went over to digital painting, but she can like paint to the point where it's almost photorealistic. She's got an amazing eye for detail, especially with people. So she loves character portraits and things like that she used to paint quite a bit. She did some pet portraits for people sometimes. And
she done one of you?
She hasn't done one of me. This was a hand-drawn one that she did.
Wow, excellent.
That was just pencil, hand-drawn on pencil paper.
Very good. Yeah, we have to have another conversation about this because, I mean, I'm into children's storybooks, right?
Yeah.
And we're looking for an illustrator.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's very good at what she does.
Just while we've got your shelves behind you, what's the top picture? Is that a picture at the top?
Yeah, it is. So my son painted that. It's called Tummy with Wings. And my wife and I looked at it and we were like, that looks like an impressionist painting. We're going to keep that and frame it because it looks amazing.
It's not possible to get down and show, is it? Right. Right. Excellent. Excellent. How old was he when he did that?
He was like 3.
Right. Because, I mean, I'm following a good friend who's also a guest on the show, actually from South Africa, right? You'll see her recording, Nikki Verd, and she talks about technology and everything. But she showed a picture of an art gallery, and it was just literally scribbles, right?
Yeah.
And the artist is, I can't remember the name of the artist, never heard of before, but he's selling the pictures anything from 1 million to like 25 million for a scribble picture. And then I'm thinking, like, because I saw that picture on yourself, my elder son's bedroom is just behind me, right? And I knocked his picture on the floor. And it's exactly, I mean, I could go and get it, but it's a very similar picture to that. And I'm thinking, like, this picture, because we did exactly the same thing. I saw the picture, and typically you put them in a stack or you throw them out or whatever. I try to keep them for memorabilia. But I saw this one. I thought, this is excellent. It's really with the colors and everything, just like that. So I framed it as well. And I told him to write his name and a date on it, right? And so he did. So funny enough, I knocked the picture over as I was changing my internet cable because I'd cut it by mistake, and I put a new one in and knocked his picture over. Right? So I don't know if everything is serendipity. I don't believe in coincidence. The fact that I saw your picture, I knocked his one over. You got ADHD and what you're doing, the illustrations. I mean, this is a conversation I could take on for hours, but we don't have that luxury for this call, but we should carry on. So whilst I'm on your shelf, I know we're digressing a lot, but maybe you can just explain what you've got there, because I'm looking at kind of this mask and wanted to know what that is.
Yeah, it's a good point. So that's Batman over there, because I'm a fan of Batman. He's awesome. Next to him, there is so I painted this guy. This is a magma dross from Warhammer. It's not what they're meant to look like, but that's what I painted it to look like.
Yeah.
So that's a miniature painting thing, which is the same as what's up there. And then I've got your usual, like, things that make you look like a coach. So I've got coaching there, agile game development up there, which is pretty cool. And down here, I've got Leadership as Language, which is the leadership book that I usually recommend to most people.
And where's your book?
My book is written right now.
Which I
it's almost done, actually.
I'm coming on to that because, I have tons of books. I get them sent all the time, but I mean, from guests.
Oh yeah,
right. So here is the latest one that was sent. So she was a guest, right? But then I'm all over the place. Oh yeah, I have this one as well. She was a guest.
Awesome.
Yeah, this one. This is actually from Australia. So
wow,
a neighbour.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all over, and I'm feeling a bit guilty. I haven't read them all yet. I have so many that they keep sending me that I need to start reading them, right? But so let's just come on to the book part. So Pauline, which I call Paul, which is easier, is actually, he is the publisher, Paul Smith Publishing, in London. And I mean, having guests on the show, I asked them, would they like to share their story and be in a collective in a book? And I asked that in the questionnaire now that I send out. And most of them say, tell me more, right? And then, so anyway, long story short, we have 11 of us that are moving forward. So 11 previous guests that are moving forward to give a chapter in a book that we're doing, a collective book. So we're a year into this, and I wanted to find a publisher and editor kind of all in one. Right. So I spent a good 6 months looking for a good one. And I tried various other ones. And in the end, I decided to move forward with Paul. And it's been a year now, and we hope to launch the book at the end of this year. It's been a painful journey when you've got 11 of us, but it's a magical experience because we're learning so much. Some have been authors before, although still learning, and most of us not written a single word before. And so it's kind of bringing us all up to speed and moving along, keeping that momentum going. So everybody's written their chapters now. It is about reviewing and getting it ready, and then to the next stage. So tell me that I reached out to him after doing a lot of research, and then decided that based on that, which was then, again, I'm not going to use the word coincidental, I'm going to use serendipity. I then later found that previous people, or people I know, particularly in Switzerland, I'm in Switzerland, although not originally from Switzerland, that they are using Paul as well, and they've launched their book. And I thought, I've seen their book and it's great. So the fact that they're using him kind of endorsed that I made the right decision. So, and then obviously meeting people like you through the book club, right, who I never knew before. So you're not part of our book, although maybe for another one, maybe you will be. But so you said that he reached out to you. So just tell me how that happened, because I didn't know that he was reaching out. I thought people would come in word of mouth, and he seems to have a big repertoire of books and publishers and all sorts. And it's a great, just plugging all of it. If you've never written a book before, if you've never written a book before, then this is how we've met. And we're all loving the journey. And he takes it easygoing, and he works with everyone in a very, very professional way. So back to you. So how did he reach out to you, and where are you on your book? What is the book about? And when is it likely to launch? Do you have a name or anything for it? And is your wife illustrating the book?
Great questions. So let's start with how me and Paul met. So I think he probably got connected with me via, because I'm a president of the International Coaching Federation branch locally. And he was launching a book with the with people from the International Coaching Federation in Europe. I'm pretty sure there was some serendipitous, to use your word there, connection between us on LinkedIn. And then one day he just we connected on LinkedIn, and then he just sent me a message and we got talking, and he was like, hey, your profile looks interesting. You've got this creative background, you've got this leadership background. Have you thought about doing the book thing? And I was like, well, tell me more. Because actually I've been working on for 10 years. I basically 10 years ago was going through a pretty tough time based on everything that I was talking before, difficult times with my business and trying to figure out how to get started. And eventually, that turned into a career. But before it turned into a career, I actually sat down and I wrote a book. It was 180,000 words by the time I was done. I wasn't happy with it because it was my first time I ever write. I wasn't a big reader at the time. I'd read a lot of Raymond D. Feist, and I loved Raymond D. Feist, and he inspired me to want to write because coming back to the game design thing, I love Dungeons and Dragons as a game because it's just an amazing way to connect with people, socialize, etc. And he wrote a whole book based on the Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And I was like, this is genius. I'm going to do that. So I did that. And then the book was shit. Sorry. Language is probably not appropriate for your thing. But what I ended up doing is it really inspired me to want to become a good writer. And so I started doing a lot of training online. I tried to get publishers, started kind of experimenting, did get a version of it published. And then I started trying different styles of writing. I wrote in comedy. I started writing in horror. I started to write for games. That allowed me to really expand my craft a bit. I took all the opportunities I could to learn my storytelling kind of craft. So I went to workshops on how to do good storytelling. I did Brandon Sanderson's like training online. And so when he asked me, it was like 10 years of like, hell yeah. That was like ready to go. And so I sent him my first chapter. He read it. He basically took me through it and like explained to me like kind of how he would help me if we were to publish it together in order to make it better. And I think what really sold me that Paulin was the person that I wanted to do this with is a while ago, I was obsessed with creativity. How does creativity work? I did a lot of research about that. One of the books I read was How to Steal Like an Artist. And in that book, he talks about don't be inspired just by your heroes. Be inspired by your heroes. Look back at the history of what those people drew on, because then you don't become a derivative of them. You understand what made them do what they did, and therefore you can create a new version of it. And Paulin encouraged me to go look at Anglo-Saxon and go look at the history of English and like, kind of like study the classics and understand how that stuff came about as part of me honing how I would go through the editing process. How were we going to refine this? And when he said that to me, I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about. I'm with him. And that's when I kind of like started, taking the next steps with him, and we went into it. And I got to say, like, it's been an amazing journey, really fun. I really enjoy working with Paul, and he's so professional, like you said before. He's got a very gentle way about him. He gives very, very direct, very clear feedback. He doesn't pull punches, but he doesn't do it in a mean way. And he does it in a way that he's completely like just offering it on the table, and you accept it or you decline it. It's up to you. But he makes his case, he puts it there, and it allows you the space to kind of take that feedback on board and to shape you and form you. And I just love his detail-oriented approach to how he does this. He wants to make really great literature. And so my book, we looked at the 180-page thing, and he's like, there's a lot of thing here, but there's not necessarily a lot of tight story here. So why don't we take one section of this and tell that story? And so we chopped like 1/3 off, like a 70,000 word chunk. And then I rewrote that whole chunk from scratch because, it had gone through multiple iterations over 10 years, and some of them better, some of them worse. And when I finished with that, it ended up at about 130,000 words. Which is, still a pretty chunky book. I've rewritten it since then about 4 times.
Wow.
So we've gone through the cycle. We're like on our 5th cycle now, where we're like going through everything in detail, making sure everything is really tight. Like he says, you have to make sure that you identify the key beats, and those key beats are crisp and well communicated and just like flow off the tongue if you read it out loud. So that's been our focus, is to like, and that's where my beautiful wife comes in. She actually helps me with that. 30,000 words is a lot to edit. It's a lot to work through. So what we do is like, we've got a process where I'll do hardcore kind of like revision of it, and then she will read it and she'll mark anything that's not quite like, doesn't quite sound right or has some consistency issues. And then I'll fix that, and then we'll read it aloud together, the whole thing. And if there's anything where either of us stutters when we're reading it, we'll mark it and we'll rework it.
Wow. I tell you, it's not an easy process. I mean, we've been a year at this, and I want to get to the exciting bit. I mean, the exciting bit now is the titling, the naming, and then building up the marketing, the promotion, everything else. But we're not there yet. We're still on the revision. So one of our authors, Pete, he's on his 18th revision. I mean, I remember we are only doing chapters. So ours are like 6,000 words, right? And I'm on my 6th revision, and I'm happy with mine. But Paul's got me to read it again. And then I'm reading it again. Like, as you say, if it doesn't flow and come off the tongue easy, then you've got to question, is the sentence the right way around? Is it the right what you're trying to say? Can you change it? And yeah, it's not easy writing a book.
Absolutely.
And these are kind of, I mean, particularly we're all writing it in English, but we're not all native English speakers. So those that aren't are struggling even harder for the ones that are. And so there is a journey, but a fun one, because a massive learning curve. But exactly what you said, I mean, writing the book, you discover more about yourself at the same time. So the byproducts of it are, it's kind of like a self-help group in a way, that particularly when there's multiple of you, you're getting to know people deep and emotionally, because most of the stories are very personal. And hence the reason for also having the authors on the show, so I can help them share their story. So
yeah, that's brilliant.
I don't want
to answer the rest of your questions.
Go on, because I know we want to wrap this up soon, but I have still 101 questions I want to ask you. So maybe we can just do quick fire ones and then wrap up where you are now, what you're doing, who your clients are, and where you are on that journey, because you do more than just that. But finish off kind of the book.
No worries. So the book's name is Eye of Winter, which is basically set in my own fictional world. It's fantasy fiction, epic fantasy. And the kind of story is laid into who I am as well. Like there's a deep kind of leadership. What does good leadership look like? Dealing with things like, imposter syndrome, and how kind of there's a lot of like coaching. There's actually a character in the book that is a coach that uses coaching language and uses like that in order to support the protagonist through tough times. And it's kind of like, it's not dark fantasy, but it is not light fantasy. So it certainly has some tough time, and the protagonist needs support. But the idea of the book is essentially that there's a kid. He's not really a kid. He's like 20 years old. He steals something because he's a thief, working for kind of like, imagine Robin Hood wasn't just a dude with a few people that followed him, but he sparked an entire movement that stretched through an entire continent. And so like many years later, 500 years later, you've got this kid working in this idea of like, the thieves are around in order to be able to balance out money. So they steal from the rich to give to the poor, because that's how economies work, and it stops inflation from happening. So the authorities are not okay with it, but they're also not entirely against it. So they're not like pursued as heavily as usually would be. But not all thieves are like that. And he steals from another thief who kind of like sets him off on this journey where he gets caught up in the spy world. And the spy world has him having to stop a heist that's about to happen, which gets him caught up in a huge war that's just kicked off. And the story is about how this team of misfits kind of like come together, form as a team, shape around this leader who really applies great modern leadership techniques around how to bring them together, how to create trust, how to bring people of very diverse backgrounds into a trusting relationship where they can work together effectively, and then to pluck that leader out at some stage so that the protagonist can learn how to lead for themselves. And that's pretty much what the story is about. It's an embodiment of what I would like to impart on the world. It's like when I said my vision is to create a world where people feel valuable, empowered, and purposeful. That's something that I hold true even in the writing. I want that to be the core message that I deliver. Is like, you want to have a team that are going to feel these qualities. Here's a model that you can look at, that how to create that environment. It is fiction. It is meant to entertain. So I'm not saying that everything in there is like scientific. It's not. But I try to stay very true to that, especially when it comes to the behaviors of that particular character, so that they can embody that. And obviously, I do justice to the other forms of leadership as well.
So, no, I love it. So with the book, is that a precursor to creating a program, a game?
Let's see if the book does well first. If it finds an audience, maybe.
No, I think it would. It's just ironic in the way that my son went to a therapy class yesterday, and within his session, I'm not going to go into the detail about it, but there was a thief within that, and he wanted to understand why the thief stole and whatever, and solve the problem so the thief could move on. And yeah, we need to talk separately. But so let's do some quick fire stuff, right? So where are you now? What are you doing? Because you talked about also coaching. I mean, coaching, not just kind of Scrum, Agile and whatever, but more personal, one-to-one, and I mean, around humanity and helping people find their purpose and the way in life. So tell me a bit more about that. How do you do it? Who are you doing it for? Where are you on this? When did it start?
So my company name that I do coaching under is called 𝗙𝗘𝗔𝗧𝗨𝗥𝗘𝗗. So Mindforge is the thing. The company, we specialize in really high-end coaching. So all the coaches are professional certified coaches or master certified coaches. And I also teach coaches. I actually teach for Coach Masters Academy as mentor and facilitator for them as well. Where this started is 2019, going through change, really wanting to dig deep and find ways to do things differently. And then I just loved coaching. I just loved having deep conversations with people that create sustainable change. I'm very, positive psychology is, my core, passion. So I did a lot of studying through the material of Martin Seligman and, by Strength Survey and all those things. And what I do with Mindforge is kind of focused on leadership development. So working with people that generally are going through transitions and change and leadership that's tough, where they have to kind of cope with heavy stress, and helping them to reshape how they approach the world and life. And, anybody that knows coaching well enough knows that it's almost identical regardless of the subject matter, because at the end of the day, you're working with thinking processes. You're not really looking at the subject matter. But I am also a subject matter expert when it comes to leadership. And so what I usually do is I work with the person to first deal with the deep underlying challenges that need to be addressed, which then allows them to become aware of what needs their attention. And then the question is, do they already have the knowledge, but they didn't know they had that knowledge? Or do they now become aware that they don't have that knowledge? And if it's in the latter bucket and I have that, then we'll switch into more mentorship and training, and I'll cover that. And then we'll come back to coaching and we'll work again through what is the behavioral change that needs to occur? How do we actually address the underlying beliefs, the values that drive that behavior? Because if you don't understand the belief that's creating that behavior, you can't really change the behavior. It'll just be a temporary fix. So that's the essence of what I do there. And what we usually do is we work with companies. So not that I don't work with individuals, but we usually work with companies. They come to us and say, we would like to work with an executive team that needs to, up their style, or they need to be more responsive to the market. And so we take them under our wing and we work with them. We sometimes do team coaching with them, where we actually look at them as a unit and figure out how to progress from there. But specifically having that one-on-one touch that really looks at the individual and looks after them specifically. I am a strong believer that change happens from within. It doesn't happen from without. A company cannot change you. You have to change the company. So that's the way that we work. We go deep. We deal with the underlying beliefs, and then we move forward.
No, I love it. No, I think particularly in the work environment at the moment, particularly over the last few years, there's been a lot of stress, anxiety, burnouts, unfortunately, suicides as well. And there's a lot of problems, and the workplace doesn't kind of encourage that or even know how to deal with that. So they need help as well. And yeah, it's something that is a global problem. I mean, I see here in Switzerland, nobody talks about the mental health issues of people. I mean, they're quick on social media platforms like LinkedIn to talk about the bad bosses, the toxic environment and whatever. But to me, I want to know why. How is that happening in the first place? If we can address that, I mean, people don't just become, or they're not just bad bosses. Something triggers it in the first place. And yeah, so I think it's admirable what you're doing, and it's something that is a global problem. So typically your clients are within New Zealand. Is it within a certain geographic? I mean, it has to be face to face, or can it be done remotely, online, or is it a combination, or how do you deliver it?
Majority is online. Being connected to an international school means that I end up working with a lot of people all over the world. I've had clients in the UK. I've had clients in, all over Asia and Africa. It's really not really much of a challenge for me to be able to deal with clients far off. The main question is usually more an appetite and a taste thing. Like, some people love face-to-face. That's what they want. And there's definitely value in face-to-face. There's not necessarily a loss of quality when it comes to doing these things online. So if someone happens to be in Wellington, which is a small city, then I'm happy to do face-to-face. In fact, some of my most fun coaching sessions have actually been taking one of my clients out on a walk, and we would go sit under a waterfall and do coaching for the afternoon. But that's a special situation that I can do or create here. Sometimes we do get flown to locations when we are working with clients and they want to have more kind of like bigger facilitation sessions, and we will fly over and we'll do that. But for the most part, it's online, using platforms like Zoom. We have tons of different techniques for being able to do one-on-one coaching or group coaching or facilitation, using digital whiteboards or using breakout rooms in order to be able to create powerful conversations.
Excellent. It sounds fantastic. And I love it in the way that if you have that skill, I mean, you want that skill to be globally recognized and not just locally, because other people can benefit. And I think with technology today, we can do that. All right. It was always nice to meet people in person because you pick up on a lot of things that you can't. But I mean, even having these calls, you can have deep conversations with people that you've never met before. And it creates that trust as well. And I mean, I would never have met you if it wasn't for technology. I'm not going to be in New Zealand looking around for people that can come on a show. So, but now that I have people on the show, you're creating that bond with people that want to work with you further. And hence the reason why some of us are moving forward into a collective book. So it, as you say, you don't lose. Too many people say, oh yeah, it's not the same. Of course it's not the same, it's different, but it doesn't mean it's not valued. And I think you get extreme value from doing it this way. And then you have that global reach that my services can be offered to anybody. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think it's beautiful what you're doing. So you said we as in a team. So you have others obviously work with you.
Yeah. So I have two partners that are also owners of the company, which is Mark Gemmell, and who's also a professional certified coach and an agile coach. And then Sarah Devereaux, who's a master certified coach as well. And then we also work with people like Evan Spargo, who's a master certified coach. And we work with Joe Lanigan, who's also a master certified coach. So we thanks to our kind of network, we can tap into quite an extensive network if we really need to, who are all really highly qualified, very professional and capable coaches. that allow us to serve a lot of different clients, and kind of do that based on expanding capacity or very small, specific, focused and targeted.
Yeah, I love it. I keep saying that because it really resonates with me. And I mean, I do coaching as well, based on my own personal experience and where I felt burnt out, lost, disillusioned with life and everything, and hit rock bottom. And then I didn't find a coach. It kind of happened. And anyway, the coach asked me one simple question, which is in the book, actually, so I'm not going to say too much. She said, the problem is you don't know who you are. I said, of course I do. She said, who are you? And I said, James. And she said, I didn't ask what your name was. She said, I know your name's on this piece of paper. She said, who are you? I said, father of 3 kids. She said, no, I didn't ask that question either. She said, who are you? And thinking it's a trick question, isn't it? And she said, no, it's not a trick question. I'm just asking them a simple question. Who are you? And I couldn't answer it. I could not answer the question. So, yeah, that was a huge turning point in my life because I didn't know. And she said, 99% of the population wouldn't answer the question either. They don't know, which then got me thinking this is a fundamental problem, like with the way that we learn and with the way that we grow up. And then just going back to your childhood, if you'd asked the question then, I'm sure I would have known. But anyway, so I want to know more about the coaching program. So also maybe to be a coach, right, in the team, because I then did exactly what you did. I was so fascinated about it that I studied it. This was based on the Ikigai philosophy. So then I studied it for 4 years, and then the ins and outs, where did it begin and everything. And then I thought this bit's missing. How could I add the bits missing? So then I studied emotional intelligences and the frames of mind by Howard Gardner, right? And then I still felt there was something missing. And I worked with a changemaker group in the UK. And they said, you've got to know about persona types of people. I thought, persona, what the hell does that mean? And then I started learning about persona types. So then I blend these 3 components together. And then it makes my own magical program, which I could offer as well. But anyway, let's kind of wrap this up. So you have the book. When is the book coming out?
So we're in the probably close to final editing pass. So I couldn't say the exact date yet. Myself and Paul haven't decided on it yet. But he wants me to go through the entire book from the back to the front again. So that'll be fun, like going the other way around. I think probably if I'm guessing, we're probably talking at least another couple of months before I'll be able to go through it another time, in the way that he's got in mind. But I'm also enjoying the ride. I've been working at it with him for you about a year now. And I'm kind of just letting him help me figure out when are we ready to go. But I'm also ready, like yourself, to start to kind of get it out there, let people read. But that said, I am looking for beta readers, people who are willing to kind of read early copies and give me feedback on continuity errors or anything like that. So if you want to be on, I can't guarantee you'll be selected as a beta reader, but anybody who wants to can just reach out, and I'd be happy to put them on the list.
Yeah, I love reading people's books, particularly when it's something like that. And I mean, I have all of this bunch of books here that I'm guilty of not reading yet. And so maybe I'm not the best choice, although I would love to read it. But just go back to what you said previously. You said about audio books. I mean, it will be available audio as well.
That's the plan, yeah. So my wife really wants to be the one that reads it for me, and she's probably a better reader than me because ADHD. But I also kind of feel compelled to read it myself for the audiobook. But myself and Paulin will still discuss. But there definitely will be an audiobook one way or the other. Question is how are we going to do the recording and what's the best voice for it?
Because like you said about learning, I mean, if someone gave me a book and they said, like, here's a book, like, 10,000 words, 100,000 words, whatever, I think, oh, no, I can't read that. I mean, I remember being in South Africa and I got the Nelson Mandela book I've got somewhere, and it was so thick. I thought, I'm never going to read that. But there was a reason why I got it and how I got it and everything. So I thought, well, I have to read it. I mean, it took me forever. But now I try to listen to audiobooks because I absorb it more. And I like things being read to me. It then reminds me of bedtime storytelling when I was a kid, and what I also do with my kids' bedtime storytelling. And we record all the stories. So there's all the audio recordings, like hundreds of them now, of bedtime stories. That's why we'd like someone to draw the illustrations for the books and then create a whole series of books. But that's another story. But audio, I think, is a great option, because you could be in the car, on the train, and on the beach, and you can just listen to the book. If I had to get up and read the book, and it's probably the wrong light, to me, it's hard work. Although I want the physical book, but I want the physical book and the audio.
Well, it's easier to highlight things in a physical book, and
exactly,
like being able to quickly reference it. An audiobook's really hard to reference something in. But what's interesting for me is, like, I used to be a terrible reader. Now it's like nonfiction, audiobooks, fiction, only real read. And that's because I have ADHD. One of the things is that you can't really shut your brain down very easily. It keeps going. So sleep time routine is really crucial for me. Otherwise, I end up not being able to sleep. So I got into the habit of reading for 1 hour before bed every night. And I stopped caring about how long the book is. All I care about is lying down, reading for 1 hour, and then sleeping. And it's not, probably there's people that read way more than that, because I'm not the fastest reader. But in the last 3 months, I've read 9 fiction books. And I'm talking like fantasy books. So I'm talking like 1,000-page books. Because I'm just reading consistently, and it's not about finishing them. It's just about enjoying them and relaxing. And like, that's where my ADHD actually really helped me, because I had to learn that habit, but it was the reason that before it really hurt me, because it felt like such a big chore having to read. But when it didn't matter how fast I read, it was just me sitting there and reading. And if it took me longer, I got to save some money, because I wouldn't have to buy another book within a week from now. That was fine. Then it stopped being a big thing for me, and started just like dropping books like crazy.
Yeah. Now, you've just, I mean, I used to do that. I used to be back-to-back book reader. And mine started with fiction books. I mean, I like the Dan Brown series. So like the Da Vinci Code or whatever. So once I read one, I bought the box set. As soon as I finished one, I went straight into the next one, and then the next one and the next one. But I found in the end, they were all very much the same. I needed different authors because it was too similar. But then I started reading then all sorts of fiction books then. And then could see what's the correlation between the non-fiction and fiction. And although the Da Vinci Code is non-fiction, it's fiction, I could see that there could be non-fiction within the fiction. So what could you extract out there? But anyway, you made me think of a title. Well, I'm not going to share it, but when you talked about 1 hour of here, I mean, really a focused 1 hour, right? I think a lot of people think I can't achieve anything, but if you think that the day has 24 hours, right? Do you really focus a dedicated 1 hour to anything, right? Or is it just get things done and whatever? But really, no distractions, no nothing. Get everything out the way. It doesn't matter if you're reading a book or playing an instrument or whatever you're doing. That dedicated 1 hour. And I think you could achieve more value and be more constructive if you saw the day, right? So, right, then at the end of the week, I've done, well, if it's a working week, you could say that I've done 5 hours of dedicated work, that no interruptions. Do we really get that in a week? I think there's too many disruptions that we do not have that. And yeah, it gave me a title for a book now that I need to write.
Go for it. Sounds like a good book.
Well, you've heard that book. There's a couple of authors that wrote a book. What was it? I forgot the name now. The 40-hour week. No, 40-hour week or 40-hour. No, 12-week year. That was it. The 12-week year. What you can achieve in 12 weeks. And then look at it in 12-week chunks rather than work a year and then reflect on the year, because then you think, oh, well, why didn't we change it like 6 months ago? So if we look at 12-week slots, so 3 months, then what you can achieve could be more than what you could do in a year because it's very focused. But anyway, we digress. So I'm just going to wrap this up now. So Jaques, you have been a fantastic 126th guest. You're absolutely amazing. I knew very, very little about you being in the book group because I obviously focus on the team and the group that I'm in. But what you've shared, there is so many synergies between what you're doing, what I'm doing, and others. Also with the children, with my kids, and with the gaming, the way that you're focused on helping people, the book. I mean, you're just an amazing person. And I absolutely love you. So we didn't touch on lots of, I mean, I've got the notes here on my other screen. I mean, you're talking about well, let me just highlight some just before we go. Yeah, scuba diving with sharks. We didn't talk about that. You drove a tank in Prague. I'm curious about that story. Yeah, and some other amazing things. So I'd have to have you back to share more because we just kind of run out of time. But I'm curious about that. Swimming with the sharks. And I mean, I kind of swim with the sharks every day. But that's different type of sharks, I guess. So yeah. I absolutely love what you do. It's great what you're giving back as well. And the learning, the constant, I mean, I say one of the fundamental reasons why we're here is to learn, and you should be absorbing that and doing that constantly. I mean, there's never a time that we shouldn't be learning because it's a constant journey of learning. And you can learn and forget, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't not try to learn. I mean, my retention of learning, I have to go back and read it again. I think, oh, maybe I didn't read it properly the first time because I didn't remember that bit. But anyway, another story.
Very normal experience.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. I thought it was just me. I thought
repetition is key. Repetition is key.
No, well, they say practice. I mean, it's about keep reading it through and think, well, I never saw that the first time. It's a bit like watching a movie. Like, I never saw that in the movie and I had to watch it again. I think, yeah, now I see it. So, yeah, some people see it first time and others have to watch it 10 times before they see the obvious. So
there is attention and stuff, right? Like there's a breakdown that of like how much information you can retain based on whether it's a book, whether it's visual, whether it's auditory. And there definitely is a drop-off, especially if you're only engaged with it. If you try to read a lot in one go, it also makes it a lot harder to retain it. If you read one chapter a day and you just try to apply that in that day, and then you read another one, you're much more likely to be able to retain it than if you read an entire book in a day and then try to figure out how much of that information you can use, because probably none of it. I'm not saying you're reading a whole book in a day, but often that's what happens with audiobooks. People listen to them and kind of lose attention. It's better to really be crisp and clear, like you said, the hour of focus, and then retain as much as you can from that and revisit it. It's totally fine. What's wrong with repeating it? It's great value, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of stimulates kind of training. When you give training, I mean, I've been in these training sessions that have been all day, and I thought, wow, it's overload. I'm going to go home and forget it all. But if you focus specifically on one thing, and you did it. I mean, I do a LinkedIn training program, and I think it's a minefield if you try to do everything. But if you section it out, right, we'll just do the top section. Why is it the top section? Why is it so important? What is it that we're going to cover? And then let's focus on that until we've done that. Don't worry about all the others yet. That will come. And then once we've mastered and finished that, right, you can always tweak it afterwards, but we've done it. Then we move on to the second section. And I think with everything, I mean, learning to drive a car, you look at the car, and oh, scary. We'll say, no, we're just going to learn what are the principles of driving the car first. So just so you're familiar with the pedals. I mean, we were taught, I know we're completely digressing now, but we were taught the pedals, ABC, right? Accelerator, brake, clutch. Remember it, ABC. And I thought, well, I can remember that, ABC. That makes sense. Now, if you just started talking about the clutch does this, and I'm thinking, well, what is a clutch? Right? But if you say it's ABC, remember ABC, then I always remember in that order, right? But anyway.
Keep it simple.
Exactly. That's what Einstein said. Keep it simple. And lots of people say, keep it simple, and you remember. People that come with complex programs and things just confuse the hell out of you. But anyway, we will wrap up now. So this will, obviously, I'll edit this and make it available so you can then share it with the audience. It will go on YouTube, and the audio will go on Spotify. You can do what you want with it. I can also give you the MP4 file so you can play around with it as well. And yeah, if people want to reach out to you, you can provide all the links as well. So some of the links that we mentioned earlier about the gaming, if there's any of these games links that you want to share, also more about the book, we can also promote Paul a little about the publisher. And we'll just put those in the notes afterwards.
Okay, so, perfect.
So once again, thank you very much for being our 126th guest.
My pleasure. And thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate your making space for me on your show.
Absolute pleasure. I'm glad I've done it. I'm glad Paul connected us as well. So that's another thing we have to thank him for. And yeah. I guess it's getting on pretty late there now, is it?
Yeah, it's about 10 o'clock at night.
Okay. So I wish you a great evening, what's left of it, and a wonderful weekend.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of yours as well. And probably going to be doing some writing, I hope. Enjoy that as well.
Okay. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Cheers.
Wow. That was another featured business brought to you by Visibility Impact. If you'd like to be our next featured guest or learn how James Mofat can help you leverage on the art and power of interactive storytelling for your business, reach out and schedule a call now.